Over 90% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you love these stories, please subscribe. Your support is the inspiration that keeps this channel alive. The first model stepped onto my backyard runway wearing a wedding dress made from 12 retired pillowcases, just as the HOA president climbed onto my fence and shouted, "This laundry carnival ends now!" Unfortunately for her, the dress had a 20-foot train. Unfortunately for me, the model turned too quickly. The train wrapped around the HOA president's ladder, pulled it sideways, and left Brenda Kincaid dangling from the fence with one sensible beige shoe in the air, while 80 people applauded because they thought it was part of the show. My name is Marcus Reed, and until that weekend, I had never hosted a fashion event, managed a runway, or watched a homeowners association president become accidentally accessorized by household linen. I was a 49-year-old divorced carpenter living in Maple Lantern Estates outside Asheville, North Carolina, where the lawns were trimmed, the porches were painted, and Brenda believed visible personality lowered property values. My only original contribution to the neighborhood had been a cedar birdhouse shaped like a tiny courthouse, which she once described as architecturally sarcastic. The clothesline was far less ambitious. My electric dryer had begun making a noise like a toolbox falling down a staircase. Every cycle ended with a burning smell, one damp sock, and the machine flashing an error code that apparently meant purchase another machine. The repair technician quoted me $900, then recommended a new dryer with 17 settings, internet access, and a phone application that could notify me when my underwear was ready. I told him my underwear had never required administrative support. The next morning, I built a clothesline. I used 2 cedar posts left over from a porch project, set them behind my privacy fence, and installed 3 retractable lines between them. The entire structure stood below fence height, matched the wood around the garden, and disappeared when I wasn't using it. It was practical, clean, and sturdy enough to survive mountain wind or an aggressive collection of wet bath towels. I liked it immediately. My father had owned a small dry cleaning shop in Tennessee, but at home he refused to put work shirts in a dryer. He claimed sunlight was free, wind was honest, and machines charged money to wrinkle things faster. When I was a boy, he taught me to hang shirts by the bottom seam, so clothespin marks stayed hidden, a skill that had seemed useless for 30 years, until the morning I stood in my backyard with 12 clean shirts and no functioning appliance. The first load looked harmless. 3 pairs of work jeans hung beside white undershirts, towels, and 1 red flannel shirt. The breeze moved through them slowly while I drank coffee on the deck. For the first time since the dryer broke, my laundry room didn't smell like toasted plastic. Then something rose above the fence. At first I thought it was a large beige mushroom. Then Brenda Kincaid's sunglasses appeared. "Marcus." "Morning, Brenda." Her chin climbed another inch above the fence. "Are those clothes?" I looked behind me. "No, migratory fabric." She didn't smile. Brenda was the president of the Maple Lantern Estates HOA, and the only person I knew who could wear gardening gloves without touching soil. She was short, aggressively organized, and always dressed in shades that matched filing cabinets. Her favorite phrase was, "for the good of the community," usually spoken moments before making the community miserable. "You're drying laundry outside," she said. "That is the current allegation. We have standards. I used clothespins. That isn't what I mean." She rose higher until I could see both shoulders. I pointed toward the fence. "Are you standing on a chair?" "That is irrelevant." "It explains the floating head." Brenda lowered herself slightly, although not enough to restore her dignity. She informed me that outdoor laundry created an economically distressed visual impression. According to her, Clothesline suggested broken appliances, poor maintenance, and an unfortunate rural atmosphere. This was an impressive accusation, considering Maple Lantern Estates had been built on former farmland and still shared a property line with 3 cows named Dolly, Pearl, and Kevin. "No one can see the line from the road," I said. "I can see it." "You climbed onto furniture." "I was conducting a visual assessment." "You were spying over my fence." Brenda ignored that and told me the clothesline needed to be removed before the architectural committee reviewed my property. She warned that refusing could result in fines, hearings, and corrective action. Then her beige mushroom head disappeared behind the fence with a plastic scrape and a small grunt. 10 minutes later, I received an email. The subject read, "Visible garment suspension concern." I opened it, expecting a warning. Instead, Brenda had attached 6 photographs. The first showed my shirts from above the fence. The second focused on my jeans. The third was a dramatic close-up of 2 socks that had somehow been photographed like criminal suspects. The final image showed my red flannel shirt moving in the wind with a caption claiming it was visible from multiple elevated angles. There were no elevated public areas near my house. Unless Brenda had installed a watchtower, every photograph had been taken from a ladder. I replied with one question. "How many elevated angles belong to you?" She did not respond. By lunchtime, however, a laminated notice had appeared on my front door. It ordered me to remove the clothesline within 48 hours because it constituted an unauthorized textile display system. The phrase was so ridiculous that I read it aloud 3 times, hoping it would become sensible through repetition. It didn't. My neighbor, Wallace Boone, wandered over while I was still standing on the porch. Wallace was 68, permanently cheerful, and had spent most of his career repairing church organs. He wore suspenders every day, even while swimming, although nobody understood how. "What did Brenda discover now?" he asked. I handed him the notice. He adjusted his glasses. "Unauthorized textile display system." "Yes." Wallace looked toward my backyard. "That sounds expensive." "It cost $83. She made it sound like you built a department store." "She may be disappointed when she sees the socks." Wallace reread the notice. Then his expression changed. "My niece belongs to a textile club." I waited. That sentence did not initially sound dangerous. "She designs clothes," he continued. "Old curtains, tablecloths, damaged quilts, things people throw away. Her club does fashion shows for charity." Good for her. They lost their weekend venue. Less good. The floor at the Community Arts Center flooded. I stared at him. Wallace looked toward my backyard again. "No. I haven't asked anything." "Your face has." He smiled. "She needs a long outdoor space, somewhere private, somewhere models can change inside, and somewhere clothing can be hung before the show." I folded Brenda's notice. "You want to turn my backyard into a fashion runway." "I want Brenda's unauthorized textile display system to reach its full potential." I laughed despite myself. Wallace's niece arrived that afternoon. Her name was Tessa Boone, a 32-year-old costume designer with silver-framed glasses, bright orange sneakers, and the restless energy of someone whose brain permanently contained 3 projects. She chaired the Asheville Rethread Collective, a local group that transformed donated fabric into wearable art and used its shows to fund free sewing classes for teenagers. Tessa walked through my side gate and stopped beneath the clothesline. This is perfect. It holds shirts. It can hold art. It also holds towels. Functional art. She paced the length of my lawn, measuring with her eyes. The deck could serve as the entrance, the stone path could become the runway, and the cedar clothesline could display garments in the order they would appear. Folding chairs would fit along both sides without damaging the grass. I showed her Brenda's notice. Tessa read it once. Then she grinned. Unauthorized textile display system. That phrase has been haunting me all day. No, that's the event name. By sunset, she had designed a digital invitation. The unauthorized textile display. A weekend backyard runway by the Asheville Rethread Collective. Below the title was a drawing of a clothespin wearing sunglasses. The event would be invitation only, held entirely behind my fence and limited to Saturday and Sunday afternoons. Instead of selling tickets, the club would collect sewing supplies and donations for high school arts programs. Nothing in the HOA rules prohibited a private gathering, handmade clothing, temporary chairs, or invited guests walking across a backyard. More importantly, the clothesline itself remained legal. The HOA handbook prohibited commercial laundry equipment, permanent structures above fence height, and clotheslines visible from public roads. Mine satisfied every requirement. Brenda's notice relied entirely on phrases she had invented, perhaps while standing on the same patio chair she used for surveillance. Tessa brought 12 club members over Friday evening. Within an hour, my quiet yard became the strangest workshop in western North Carolina. One woman stitched silk flowers onto a jacket made from old sofa fabric. 2 college students turned flour sacks into summer dresses near my barbecue grill. Wallace modeled a vest sewn from retired neckties and refused to remove it after 3 people told him he looked surprisingly expensive. I found a mannequin wearing my gardening hat. A teenage designer had draped a shower curtain over it and added a handwritten card reading, Collection, Moisture-Resistant Elegance. By 9 o'clock, garments filled the retractable lines. There were dresses made from quilts, coats constructed from denim scraps, skirts made from vintage kitchen curtains, and one formal gown created entirely from black and white HOA newsletters donated by a resident from another neighborhood. The paper gown rustled whenever the model moved, producing a sound like a filing cabinet being haunted. Tessa called it administrative romance. I called it dangerous around rain. At 9:20, Brenda emailed me again. A neighbor had informed her that unusual clothing activity was occurring behind my fence. She demanded permission to inspect the property before Saturday morning. I replied that private property inspections required notice and my agreement, neither of which she had. At 9:32, she sent a second message. The HOA will take whatever corrective action is necessary. Tessa read it over my shoulder. Do you think she'll come during the show? I think she'll arrive before breakfast. Excellent. Why is that excellent? She held up a wedding dress made from white pillowcases and embroidered bedsheets. Because I just found our opening look. Saturday morning began quietly. At 8, volunteers arranged chairs along the stone path. At 9, the models arrived carrying garment bags and breakfast biscuits. By 10, invited guests filled the backyard, including local shop owners, sewing teachers, neighborhood residents, and a lifestyle reporter from the Asheville paper who had heard rumors about a fashion show created by an HOA complaint. Brenda arrived at 10:14. She did not use the gate. Instead, she placed a ladder against the outside of my fence, climbed high enough to see the clothesline, and began shouting that the entire display violated community standards. When nobody obeyed, she swung one leg over the fence and announced she was entering to prevent ongoing architectural misuse. That was when the first model stepped onto the runway. Her pillowcase wedding dress floated behind her, the crowd applauded, and Brenda raised a pair of pruning shears she had apparently brought to cut the clothesline. "Stop the show!" she yelled. The model turned toward the noise. Her 20-foot train swept across the grass, looped around the ladder, and tightened just as Brenda tried to climb down. The ladder tilted. Brenda grabbed the fence. One beige shoe flew into a flower bed. The crowd erupted in applause. For several seconds, Brenda dangled above my lawn while the wedding dress model continued walking because she believed the commotion was intentional choreography. Tessa stood beside the deck with both hands over her mouth, trying not to laugh loudly enough to ruin the music. I walked toward the fence. "Brenda, get me down." "Of course." I looked at the reporter, the cameras, the 80 guests, and the line of models waiting beneath the sign that read, "The unauthorized textile display." Then I looked back at Brenda. "You should know everyone thinks you're the comedy portion." Her face turned the same color as my red flannel shirt. What none of us knew yet was that Brenda had brought more than pruning shears. Inside the folder tied to her waist was a plan to fine me, suspend my neighborhood privileges, and force the entire runway to shut down before noon. Unfortunately for her, the funniest piece of clothing in the show had not appeared yet. It was being worn by the HOA treasurer. The HOA treasurer walked onto my runway, wearing a blazer made from 36 months of rejected violation notices. His name was Raymond Pike, a nervous accountant with silver hair, orthopedic sneakers, and the permanent expression of a man who had just discovered a decimal point in the wrong place. He had joined the board because he liked budgets, not battles, and until that morning I had never seen him wear anything more adventurous than a gray polo shirt. Now he stood beneath my cedar clothesline in a paper blazer covered with phrases like "unapproved mulch," "decorative object exceeds limit," and "seasonal wreath displayed 3 days early." The crowd went silent for one stunned second. Then someone shouted, "Check the pockets!" Raymond reached into the left pocket and pulled out a pink warning slip. "Improper recycling bin angle," he read. Laughter rolled across the yard. He checked the other pocket. "Excessive porch cheerfulness." Even Raymond began laughing at that one. Brenda, still balanced awkwardly against the fence, stopped demanding help long enough to stare at him. "Raymond." He looked toward her. "Good morning." "What are you wearing?" "A financial record." Tessa nearly dropped her microphone. The blazer had been created by one of the rethread designers using duplicate notices Raymond had found in the HOA's archived files. No private information appeared on the garment. Names and addresses had been carefully removed, leaving only the absurd wording, dates, and escalating fine amounts. Brenda's expression changed from humiliation to panic. "Those documents belong to the association." "They're copies," Raymond replied. "You had no authority to remove them." "I didn't remove anything." He adjusted one paper lapel. "I digitized the records 6 months ago. These were marked for shredding." The reporter near the deck began writing quickly. Brenda pointed the pruning shears toward Raymond, as though she had discovered a traitor in ceremonial armor. "You are an officer of this board." "Yes." "You're making us look ridiculous." Raymond glanced down at the words covering his chest. "I don't think the jacket did that." The crowd erupted again. I finally untangled the pillowcase train from Brenda's ladder and helped lower her safely into my backyard. The missing beige shoe remained in the flower bed, while the other one sank slightly into the grass. She brushed herself off, snatched the folder from her waist, and marched toward the deck with the grim determination of someone who had lost an argument but still believed she owned the microphone. "This event is over." Tessa turned off the music. The guests watched Brenda cross the lawn with one shoe, a bent pair of pruning shears, and a strip of embroidered pillowcase still caught around her belt. It was not the entrance she had planned. Even the models stepped aside, although one woman quietly whispered that the fabric around Brenda's waist improved the outfit. Brenda opened her folder. "Marcus Reed has knowingly organized an unauthorized commercial event on residential property." "It isn't commercial," I said. "There are business owners present." "They were invited?" "There is media." The reporter was invited too. "There are models." "They're volunteers." "There is a runway." "It's a stone path." "There are displayed garments." "On the clothesline you called an unauthorized textile display system." Several people applauded. Brenda ignored them and removed a multi-page document from the folder. "The board has assessed an emergency fine of $5,000. That ended the laughter. Even Wallace stopped smiling. I took the paper from her and read the first page. The notice accused me of operating a retail venue, creating public traffic, using residential space for commercial promotion, and installing temporary entertainment infrastructure without approval. It also suspended my access to the pool, clubhouse, tennis court, and community garden. I didn't use any of those facilities, but $5,000 was not funny. "You approved this fine?" I asked Raymond. He shook his head. "I've never seen it." Brenda turned sharply. "It was an emergency enforcement decision." "By whom?" "As president, I'm permitted to act when community property values face immediate harm." Raymond held out his hand. "Give me the notice." She pulled it away. "You can review it later." "I'm the treasurer, and I'm managing the situation." Raymond's voice became firmer. "If the HOA assessed a $5,000 fine, I need the account code, board vote, and enforcement authorization." Brenda said nothing. That silence told him more than the document did. Raymond removed the ridiculous paper blazer and handed it to a model beside him. Underneath, he wore his usual gray polo shirt, but something about him had changed. He was no longer the harmless accountant standing behind Brenda at board meetings. He was examining numbers. That was much more dangerous. "When was this fine entered into the financial system?" he asked. "It will be entered Monday." "So it doesn't exist yet." "It has been issued." "Without a recorded vote?" "This is an emergency." "Where does the governing document authorize an emergency aesthetic fine?" Brenda's face tightened. "I am not debating policy during a fashion stunt." Raymond held out his hand again. "Then hand me the document." She refused. The reporter raised her phone. "Mrs. Kincaid, is the fine official or not?" Brenda turned toward her. "This is a private community matter." "You announced it in front of 80 invited witnesses." "This gathering violates HOA standards." "Which specific standard?" Brenda opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Tessa gently tapped the microphone. "While the association searches for the missing rule, we'll continue with our next design." Music returned. The crowd cheered. Brenda stared at Tessa as though nobody had ever resumed a fashion show during one of her speeches. The next model stepped forward wearing a flowing blue dress made from damaged patio umbrellas. The fabric moved beautifully in the breeze, and the hem had been stitched with tiny silver raindrops. Tessa explained that the piece represented objects given a second life after storms. Brenda marched toward the portable speaker. I stepped between them. "You entered my property without permission." I entered to enforce the rules. You climbed my fence with cutting tools. The gate was blocked. The gate was unlocked. She looked toward it. The side gate stood wide open. Wallace had tied a bright ribbon around the handle and added a sign reading, "Ordinary entrance for people not seeking drama." More laughter followed. Brenda lowered her voice. "You think this is amusing? I think you made it amusing. You are turning the neighborhood against the board. No, you are standing in my backyard with one shoe and an imaginary fine." Her eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what happens next." She turned and marched toward the gate. Before leaving, she stopped beside the reporter. "Do not publish photographs of me." The reporter looked toward the cameras held by half the crowd. "I may not be your largest problem." Brenda exited through the ordinary entrance. Her abandoned ladder remained outside the fence. Her shoe remained among my marigolds, and the $5,000 notice remained in my hand. The runway continued, but the mood had changed. Guests still laughed at Wallace modeling a cape made from old neckties, and they applauded a teenage designer whose skirt had been created from her grandfather's retired work shirts. Yet every time I looked at the fine, I felt the weight of Brenda's threat. Tessa noticed. "Is it real?" "I don't know." "Can she do this?" "I don't know that either." Raymond joined us near the deck. "She cannot do it this way." "That sounds different from saying she cannot do it." He nodded reluctantly. "The board can issue fines after notice, a hearing, and a majority vote. Emergency powers are limited to immediate threats involving safety or property damage." "Is handmade fashion considered structural?" "Danger? Not unless that necktie cape catches a ceiling fan." Wallace heard him. "I'm staying outdoors." Raymond took a photograph of every page in Brenda's notice. "I need to check something." "What?" "The document number." He pointed toward a code printed in the upper corner. "That sequence belongs to last year's landscape enforcement batch." "So?" "So this notice may have been created by editing an old form." "That sounds improper." "It may be more than improper." He looked toward the gate. "If she entered a fine under an old authorization number, she may have tried to make it appear as though the board approved it months ago." The mystery beneath the comedy suddenly became much darker. Raymond left before the final model appeared. The show ended just after 1 o'clock with the paper gown called Administrative Romance. The designer had added a dramatic train made from copied HOA newsletters, and each step produced a loud rustling sound. When the model reached the end of the path, she turned, opened the paper skirt, and revealed a bright red lining covered with the word "denied." The crowd rose to its feet. Tessa announced that the event had collected nearly $4,000 in donations and sewing supplies. 2 boutique owners offered to display selected garments, while the newspaper reporter requested interviews with several teenage designers. What had begun as a backup venue was becoming the most successful event the Rethread Collective had ever organized. Then 3 police vehicles entered Maple Lantern Estates. Nobody applauded this time. They stopped in front of my house. A uniformed officer entered through the side gate and asked for Marcus Reed. I stepped forward. "That's me." "Sir, we received a report of stolen HOA records, unlawful business activity, and an attempted assault involving gardening equipment." I looked at the pruning shears still lying near the fence. "Who supposedly attacked whom?" The officer checked his notes. "The report says you threatened the HOA president with cutting tools." The entire backyard erupted, not with laughter, with disbelief. The reporter raised her camera. Tessa stepped beside me. "Officer, there are dozens of witnesses." "So I see. And at least 20 videos. I'd like to review them." Within minutes, phones appeared from every direction. Guests showed Brenda climbing the fence, Brenda holding the shears, Brenda attempting to cut the line, and Brenda becoming tangled in the wedding dress. One camera had captured her clearly announcing the $5,000 fine. The officer watched 3 recordings. Then he looked at me. "Did you invite her onto the property?" "No." "Did you threaten her?" "No." "Did you touch the shears?" "Only after she dropped them." He turned toward the reporter. "You recorded the full interaction?" "Yes." "Please preserve the footage." The second officer examined the paper fine. "Is this an official association document?" "That's what she claimed." He read the number in the corner. Then he looked at his partner. "I've seen this code before." My stomach tightened. "Where?" He pointed toward a patrol car. "We responded to a dispute here last winter. Same authorization number. Different homeowner." Wallace slowly removed his glasses. "What kind of dispute?" The officer looked around the gathering crowd. "A woman was fined for installing a wheelchair ramp." The yard became completely silent. The humor vanished so quickly it felt like someone had turned off the sun. I looked at Brenda's notice again. Same number, different homeowner, different violation. The officer folded the document carefully. "This may be useful." "Useful for what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the notice inside an evidence envelope. "For determining how many times this form has been used." The police left after taking statements, copies of video recordings, and the abandoned pruning shears. They did not arrest anyone. They also did not dismiss the matter as a neighborhood disagreement. At 2:30, Raymond called me. His voice was shaking. "I found the authorization." "What did it say?" "It was approved for one specific fine 11 months ago." "The wheelchair ramp?" "Yes." "Why is Brenda using the number again?" "That's not the worst part." I stepped away from the remaining guests. "What is?" "She has used it at least 14 times. I looked toward the clothesline, where the final dresses moved gently in the afternoon wind. 14 fines. 1 approval. Raymond continued. "Some of the payments were entered under temporary accounts and later moved." "Moved where?" "I don't know yet." Behind me, Tessa was helping the teenage designers pack their garments. The weekend runway was supposed to be a funny answer to an absurd complaint. Instead, Brenda's fake fine had opened a door that appeared to lead far beyond my backyard. "Marcus," Raymond said, "do not pay anything." "I wasn't planning to. And don't remove the clothesline." "Why?" "Because she'll claim you admitted the violation." He paused. "The full board is meeting tomorrow morning." "About my runway?" "No." His voice dropped. "About Brenda." The full HOA board met Sunday morning inside a clubhouse decorated with fake orchids, inspirational wall art, and enough nervous silence to qualify as a hostage situation. Brenda arrived 7 minutes late, wearing a navy blazer and both shoes. She carried 3 binders, a legal pad, and the expression of someone who had spent the night inventing explanations faster than facts could destroy them. Every chair in the room was occupied, and residents stood along the walls because news of the reused fine number had traveled through Maple Lantern Estates before breakfast. I sat beside Raymond. Across the aisle, Tessa wore an elegant jacket made from old theater curtains. Wallace had chosen the necktie cape again, claiming formal investigations deserved formal clothing. The local reporter sat near the back with her notebook open, while two teenage designers quietly passed around miniature clothespins painted gold. Brenda placed her binders on the table. This meeting concerns unauthorized disclosure of confidential association materials. Raymond leaned toward his microphone. No, this meeting concerns unauthorized fines. Brenda looked at him. We will follow the agenda. I prepared the agenda. You altered it without presidential approval. I'm the treasurer, not your decorative calculator. A few residents laughed. Brenda struck the table with her pen. Order! The board's vice president, Lorraine Cobb, cleared her throat. Lorraine was a retired school principal who normally treated HOA meetings like slow-moving weather systems, unpleasant, unavoidable, and best observed from a distance. That morning, however, she had a stack of printed financial reports in front of her and the expression of a woman who had just discovered someone forged a hall pass. Raymond, she said, explain what you found. He connected his laptop to the television screen. A spreadsheet appeared. The first column listed homeowners. The second showed alleged violations. The third displayed fine amounts. The fourth contained the same authorization number repeated 14 times. The room became very quiet. Raymond pointed toward the screen. This number was originally approved for one specific enforcement action involving a wheelchair ramp installed without prior architectural review. A woman near the front raised her hand. That was mine? Everyone turned. Her name was Elaine Porter, a retired nurse who lived on Dogwood Lane with her husband, Martin. Martin had suffered a stroke the previous winter and returned home using a wheelchair. Elaine had installed a temporary aluminum ramp before requesting HOA approval because the hospital would not release him without safe access to the house. Brenda had fined her. I paid $1,200, Elaine said. Lorraine looked shocked. For a wheelchair ramp? Brenda shifted in her chair. The issue was procedural. My husband couldn't enter his own house. You installed it without permission. The board approved it 2 weeks later. That does not erase the initial violation. Elaine stood slowly. No, but you told me the fine had been approved unanimously. All eyes moved toward the board. Lorraine shook her head. I never voted on that. Another board member, Glenn Price, lifted both hands. Neither did I. The final board, member Marcy Lane, looked down at the table. I thought Raymond handled the fines. Raymond turned toward her. I record approved fines. I don't invent them. Brenda opened one of her binders. We are losing focus. No, Elaine said. For the first time, we are finding it. That line moved through the room like a current. Raymond advanced the spreadsheet. The next homeowner had been fined $800 for a temporary dumpster used after storm damage. Another paid $600 for a child's wheelchair-accessible swing. A widower had been fined for leaving a moving container in his driveway 3 hours longer than permitted after the company canceled pickup. Every fine used the same authorization number. Every resident had been told the board approved it. The board had approved none of them. Then Raymond displayed the financial accounts. Most payments entered the normal enforcement fund. He highlighted several yellow rows. But 9 were temporarily transferred to an account called Community Image Restoration. Lorraine frowned. I've never heard of that account. Neither had I. How much money? Just under $11,000. A murmur spread across the room. Brenda leaned forward. The account was used for emergency appearance corrections. Raymond turned toward her. What corrections? Landscaping, signage, beautification? Show us the invoices. They are being compiled. You told me last night they were archived. They are being retrieved from archive. You told Lorraine this morning they were lost during a software migration. Brenda's face tightened. Financial records are complicated. Raymond nodded. That is why people usually avoid giving 3 explanations in 12 hours. Wallace whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. She should have picked the one with pirates. The reporter covered a smile. Lorraine removed her glasses. Brenda, did the board authorize this account? The president has discretion over emergency community expenses. Not $11,000. The expenses were necessary. For what? Brenda opened her second binder. Inside were photographs. She displayed images of new shrubs near the entrance, repainted directional signs, decorative planters, and a set of bronze-colored address plaques installed around the clubhouse. At first, everything appeared ordinary. Then Tessa leaned toward the screen. Those planters are plastic. Brenda looked at her. They are commercial-grade resin. My fashion club bought the same ones for a stage set. How is that relevant? They cost $49 each. Raymond opened another document. The HOA account was charged $680 each. The room erupted. Lorraine struck the table. Quiet. Nobody became quiet. Residents began shouting questions. Someone asked why the entrance shrubs cost $9,000. Another wanted to know why the painted signs had been billed as handcrafted metal. Elaine demanded her fine back. Brenda stood. This is turning into a mob. No, I said. This is becoming an audience. She looked at me with open hatred. You caused this. I built a clothesline. You deliberately humiliated this association. You climbed my fence with pruning shears. I was preventing an illegal event. The police watched the videos. She pointed at me. You turned residents against their own community. Tessa rose from her chair. He turned a backyard into a fundraiser. Brenda faced her. You exploited an HOA dispute for publicity. We raised $4,000 for student sewing programs. You mocked our rules. You wrote the phrase unauthorized textile display system. We only gave it better typography. Laughter broke through the tension. Brenda's confidence faltered. For the first time, she seemed to understand that every dramatic phrase she used could become a fashion show slogan by lunchtime. Raymond raised one hand. There's more. The room settled again. He displayed a list of vendors paid through the Community Image Restoration account. One company appeared repeatedly. Kincaid Residential Styling, LLC. Lorraine stared at the name. Kincaid? Brenda said. Nothing. Raymond clicked another file. The company registration listed the owner as Allison Kincaid, Brenda's sister. The room fell silent. Even Wallace stopped adjusting his cape. Raymond continued carefully. The company was formed 11 months ago, 6 days before the first payment left the HOA account. Brenda closed her binder. Allison provides legitimate design consulting. To the HOA? Yes. Without bids? Emergency work does not require the same process. Without board approval? I had discretionary authority. To pay your sister? She was qualified. What does she do? Brenda hesitated. She improves residential presentation, Tessa whispered to me. That means she arranges pillows. The reporter heard her. So did several residents. Brenda's face reddened. Lorraine leaned forward. What specific service did Allison provide for the planters? Vendor coordination? She bought $49 planters and charged us $680 each? She sourced appropriate materials. From a garden center 12 minutes away? Someone near the wall called out. My son works there. More voices joined in. The meeting dissolved again. Brenda tried to reclaim control by accusing Raymond of breaching confidentiality. Raymond replied that board members had a duty to investigate suspected misuse. Lorraine asked Brenda to surrender the HOA credit card until the records could be reviewed. Brenda refused. That was her second major mistake. Her first had been climbing my fence. Lorraine asked again, Hand me the card. I am still president. Pending a board vote. You cannot remove me based on gossip. Raymond turned the television screen toward the board. This is not gossip. He displayed bank transfers, invoices, vendor registrations, and copies of emails Brenda had sent authorizing payments to her sister's company. The evidence did not prove every detail yet, but it proved enough to make the room feel suddenly colder. Lorraine looked at the other board members. I move that Brenda Kincaid be temporarily suspended from presidential authority pending an independent financial review. Glenn raised his hand. Second. Marcy nodded. All in favor? 4 hands rose. Brenda stared at them. You cannot do this. Lorraine's voice remained calm. We just did. A sound came from the back of the room. It began as one clap, then another. Within seconds, residents throughout the clubhouse were applauding. Brenda looked toward me as though I had designed the entire collapse. I hadn't. The Clothesline had simply given her a reason to misuse a fake fine in front of too many cameras. Her own records did the rest. She grabbed her binders and headed toward the door. Elaine stepped into the aisle. Where is my money? Brenda stopped. You'll need to submit a reimbursement request. No. Elaine's voice remained steady. You told me 4 board members voted against my husband's ramp. Brenda looked toward the exit. Move. Did you lie? I followed enforcement procedure. Did you lie? The entire room waited. Brenda said nothing. That silence was the closest thing to an answer Elaine had received in 11 months. She stepped aside. Brenda left the clubhouse without looking back. For several moments, nobody moved. Then Wallace raised his hand. Now that the former president is gone, may I ask a procedural question? Lorraine sighed. What? Can residents wear necktie capes to future meetings? A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Lorraine looked at the cape. Only if the seams are approved. The tension finally broke. After the meeting, the board voted to suspend every outstanding fine connected to the reused authorization number. An outside accountant would review the community image restoration account, while homeowners who had already paid would receive written updates. The police were given copies of the financial records, although everyone understood the investigation would take time. My own $5,000 fine was declared invalid before lunch. The Clothesline violation was withdrawn as well. Lorraine read the architectural standards carefully and confirmed what I had already known. A retractable line below fence height and invisible from public streets was permitted. She also added that board presidents were not authorized to climb fences, enter private property, or cut resident structures with garden tools. Wallace proposed adding that sentence permanently. Nobody objected. By Sunday afternoon, the story had reached local news sites. The headline did not mention financial records. It read, HOA President's Clothesline Crusade unravels during charity fashion show. The accompanying photograph showed Brenda suspended beside the pillowcase wedding dress, one shoe missing, pruning shears raised, and 80 guests watching. It was not flattering. It was, however, extremely popular. Tessa called me that evening. The article has been shared 17,000 times. That seems unhealthy. 3 clubs want us to repeat the show next weekend. My backyard still has footprints from the first one. A boutique offered to sponsor temporary flooring. No commercial events. Charity showcase. Still no, she laughed. Then her voice softened. The teenagers haven't stopped talking about it. They did good work. One girl received an apprenticeship offer from a costume studio. I looked through the kitchen window toward the clothesline. A few garments remained there from cleanup. An old denim jacket, the patio umbrella dress, and Raymond's notice-covered blazer. That's worth a little damaged grass, I said. Tessa agreed. Before ending the call, she mentioned one final detail. The newspaper wants a follow-up photograph. Of what? The runway. It's gone. They have another idea. The next morning, a delivery truck stopped outside my house. 2 workers unloaded a long wooden sign shaped like an oversized clothespin. It had been paid for by the Rethread Collective and painted by local art students. Across the front were the words, Marcus Reed's completely authorized textile display. I stared at it. Tessa stepped from the passenger seat. It's temporary. How temporary? Until Sunday evening. What happens Sunday? The Neighborhood Fashion Club is holding a victory walk. We do not have a neighborhood fashion club, she smiled. We do now. Behind her, 3 more vehicles pulled into the street carrying rolling garment racks, boxes of donated fabric, and residents who had apparently decided one accidental runway was not enough. That was when I realized defeating Brenda had only solved the first problem. The second problem was that my backyard had become famous. And the third problem was that Wallace had designed matching capes for the entire HOA board. By Sunday afternoon, my backyard contained 3 capes, 14 folding mirrors, 2 garment racks, a portable sewing station, and 1 retired church organ repairman demanding entrance music. Wallace had appointed himself Creative Director, a title no one had given him, and everyone immediately accepted. His matching board capes were made from old neckties donated by residents, with different patterns assigned according to personality. Lorraine received calm navy stripes. Raymond got tiny calculators. Glenn wore golf clubs, and Marcy's cape featured cheerful yellow ducks, because Wallace claimed every serious committee needed one element of confusion. I refused a cape. Wallace made me one anyway. Mine was dark green and lined with small printed clotheslines. Across the back, he had stitched Authorized Textile Supervisor in gold thread. I told him I would never wear it, which only encouraged him to add shoulder tassels. The victory walk was supposed to be small. Tessa planned a relaxed neighborhood event where residents could display handmade clothing, donate fabric, and celebrate the teenagers whose designs had attracted attention after the first runway. No reporters had been formally invited, no businesses were allowed to sell anything, and the collection table accepted only sewing supplies or donations for school arts programs. Then the mayor's wife arrived, wearing a skirt made from recycled campaign banners. She entered through the side gate with 2 friends from the Asheville Arts Council and apologized for appearing without notice. Tessa nearly swallowed her microphone. Wallace immediately offered her a necktie cape, which she accepted after confirming it had never been worn during an election. Within 15 minutes, the backyard was packed again. The cedar clothesline held finished garments, fabric samples, handwritten design sketches, and family photographs showing old backyard laundry scenes. Several residents brought pictures of parents and grandparents standing beside clotheslines in towns across the country. What began as Brenda's attempt to shame something ordinary had turned into a strange celebration of memory, skill, and clothing made by actual hands. I stood near the deck, watching Tessa help a nervous teenage girl adjust the hem of a green dress. The girl's name was Lila Mendoza. She had made the dress from 2 damaged tablecloths donated by a closed restaurant. During the first runway, a boutique owner had offered to display it, but Lila had refused because she believed one sleeve looked uneven. Tessa disagreed. "The sleeve looks handmade," she said. "That means uneven." "No, it means a person touched it." Lila stared at the fabric. "Stores don't sell things like this." "Exactly." Tessa smoothed the shoulder seam. "Stores already sell store clothing. The world doesn't need you to make more of it." Lila finally smiled. That quiet moment affected me more than the newspaper article, the invalidated fine, or Brenda dangling from my fence. The clothesline had begun as a practical answer to a broken dryer. Now a teenager stood beneath it, learning that imperfections could be evidence of talent rather than failure. My father would have understood that. He repaired thousands of garments during his years at the dry cleaning shop. He could remove stains, replace zippers, reshape collars, and press a jacket until it looked new. Yet he always said the most valuable clothing was rarely the most expensive. It was the shirt someone wore to work for 20 years, the dress kept after a wedding, or the coat that still carried the shape of the person who once owned it. I had forgotten how much I missed hearing him say things like that. The victory walk began just after 3. Wallace insisted on operating the music. His first selection was dramatic classical music that made a 6-year-old modeling a raincoat from grocery bags appear to be invading a small European country. His second song was a marching tune played too loudly, causing 3 models to walk in perfect military formation until Tessa confiscated his speaker privileges. The crowd laughed through almost every presentation. A retired dentist wore a jacket made from old Hawaiian shirts and introduced it as Tropical Regret. Lorraine modeled her board cape with such serious dignity that people stood and applauded. Raymond wore the violation notice blazer again, but this time the designers had added enormous red pockets labeled Refund Pending. Elaine Porter received the loudest applause. She pushed her husband Martin down the runway in his wheelchair while wearing a silver wrap made from the reflective material of an old emergency blanket. Martin wore a matching bow tie. When they reached the end of the stone path, Elaine turned toward the crowd and pointed at the temporary ramp installed beside my deck. "This one was approved by the homeowner," she announced. Everyone rose to their feet. Raymond stood too, clapping harder than anyone. The independent review had only begun, but the board had already voted to refund Elaine's $1,200 fine from association reserves. The same would happen for the other residents if the accountant confirmed what the records suggested. It was not a complete resolution, but it was movement in the right direction. Brenda had spent years making people feel isolated. Now they were comparing notices, sharing records, and discovering how many of them had been pressured into silence. She had mistaken embarrassment for obedience. That mistake had finally become expensive. Halfway through the show, a black sedan stopped outside my house. The crowd near the gate became quiet. Brenda stepped out. She wore a gray dress, dark glasses, and an expression that suggested she had rehearsed every sentence during the drive. Her sister Allison emerged from the passenger side carrying a leather folder. Allison looked younger than Brenda and dressed like someone who arranged decorative pillows professionally. Lorraine moved toward the gate. "You are not authorized to conduct HOA business." "I'm not here as president." Brenda lifted a sealed envelope. "I'm here as a resident," Raymond joined Lorraine. "What's in the envelope?" "My resignation." The answer spread through the crowd in whispers. Brenda entered through the open gate without climbing anything. That alone felt like progress. She stopped near the oversized clothespin sign and looked toward the runway, the garments, and the residents gathered along both sides. Her eyes found me. "You got what you wanted." I shook my head. "I wanted to dry my shirts." Several people laughed softly. Brenda did not. "You turned one disagreement into a public spectacle. You brought pruning shears. You mocked me. You invented a $5,000 fine." Her sister placed one hand on her arm. "Brenda," she pulled away. "You don't understand what it's like managing people who challenge every standard." Lorraine stepped closer. "We understand it better than you think. I protected this neighborhood. You protected your control. I maintained property values." Raymond held up the paper blazer. "You charged residents thousands of dollars without votes. The review hasn't proven that. It proved you reused authorization numbers. I handled urgent problems. Wheelchair ramps are not aesthetic emergencies." Elaine stood from her chair. Her husband rested one hand on the wheel of his chair and watched silently. Brenda looked toward them. For the first time that afternoon, some of the anger left her face. "I should have handled that differently." Elaine nodded. "You should have. I was trying to prevent people from ignoring procedure. My husband had suffered a stroke." "I know." "No. You knew paperwork. You never knew him." Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. Elaine did not shout. She didn't need to. The entire backyard heard the difference between rules and people. Allison stepped forward with her leather folder. "I need to clarify something." Raymond immediately became alert. "About the company?" "Yes." Brenda turned sharply. "Allison, don't!" "I'm tired of this." Allison removed several invoices. "My company did purchase some items for the HOA." "How many?" Lorraine asked. 6 planters, 2 signs, and a set of address plaques. "At those prices?" "No." She looked at Brenda. "I charged normal retail prices plus a small coordination fee." Raymond frowned. "The HOA paid much more." "I know. How?" "I don't know." Brenda stared at her sister. "Allison? You told me the board approved everything." "They did?" "They're standing here saying they didn't. You are not helping. I'm not trying to help you anymore." The backyard fell completely silent. Allison handed the invoices to Raymond. The amounts were far below what appeared in the HOA records. The planters had cost $52 each. The plaques were ordinary catalog items. Her company had received less than $3,000 total, not the full amount withdrawn from the community image restoration account. Raymond studied the pages. Where did the rest go? Allison shook her head. I have no idea. Every face turned toward Brenda. She looked suddenly smaller. The records are incomplete. Then complete them, Lorraine said. I'll cooperate with the review. That wasn't my question. Brenda tightened her grip on the resignation envelope. I am resigning. Raymond's voice remained calm. Resignation does not replace accounting. The words landed harder than applause. Brenda glanced toward the gate, but no one blocked her. She could leave whenever she wanted. The difference was that leaving would no longer end the questions. She handed the envelope to Lorraine. Then she turned toward me. I still think the clothesline looks cheap. The crowd reacted with a mixture of gasps and laughter. I looked at the dresses, photographs, sketches, and repaired garments hanging from the cedar lines. Maybe. I adjusted Wallace's ridiculous cape. But it has earned more for local students in 2 weekends than your luxury planters did for anyone. The mayor's wife applauded first. Others joined her. Brenda stood beneath the sound for several seconds, then walked out through the ordinary entrance. Allison remained behind to speak with Raymond and the board. The black sedan stayed parked at the curb because Brenda had apparently forgotten her sister had the keys. Wallace watched her reach the sidewalk. Should someone offer her a cape? No, I said. A small one? No. A tasteful beige one? Tessa took the microphone away from him. The victory walk continued. Lila stepped onto the stone path wearing her green tablecloth dress. The uneven sleeve moved gently in the breeze, and nobody saw a flaw. They saw a young designer walking past dozens of people who believed she had made something worth seeing. At the end of the runway, the boutique owner who had approached her the week before stood and raised a small card. I still want that dress in my window. Lila covered her mouth. The crowd cheered. Her mother cried. I turned away for a moment because something in my own eyes had started behaving suspiciously. By sunset, the donation table held more than $7,000 in money and supplies. The Arts Council offered the Rethread Collective a permanent indoor venue for future shows. The high school agreed to reopen its after-school sewing program, and Tessa was asked to lead monthly workshops. My backyard would not become a permanent fashion venue. I made that very clear. The club could return once each summer, provided Wallace never controlled the music and nobody created another dress with a train long enough to capture an HOA president. Tessa accepted the first condition and said the second depended on artistic necessity. The board held a special election 2 weeks later. Lorraine became interim president, Raymond remained treasurer, and residents approved new rules requiring recorded votes for fines above $200. Financial statements would be published quarterly, related party contracts required full disclosure, and no board member could enter private property without permission except during a genuine emergency. Wallace proposed defining a genuine emergency as fire, flood, or unattended plaid. That amendment did not pass. The independent review continued for several months. Some expenses were explained, others were refunded, and several records were turned over to investigators. I did not follow every legal detail because the matter no longer belonged to neighborhood gossip. It belonged to professionals with calculators, subpoenas, and far less patience than Raymond. Brenda moved away before winter. Her house sold quickly. Apparently, the clothesline had not destroyed property values after all. My dryer was eventually repaired, but I rarely used it. On clear mornings, I still hung shirts, towels, and bed sheets between the cedar posts. Sometimes neighbors brought clothing that needed sunlight after storage, and occasionally Tessa stopped by with a garment that required outdoor photographs. The giant clothespin sign remained in my garage. Once a year, we placed it beside the side gate for the authorized summer runway. The event became a neighborhood tradition filled with strange jackets, rescued fabric, teenage designers, and Wallace's continuing attempts to introduce capes into ordinary life. People often told me I had defeated the HOA with a fashion show. That wasn't quite true. Brenda defeated herself when she mistook ridicule for authority, secrecy for procedure, and a quiet homeowner for someone who would stay embarrassed. I simply built a clothesline, opened my gate, and allowed everyone to see what she had been trying to hide. Sometimes the best revenge is not tearing down the system. Sometimes it is hanging the truth where the whole neighborhood can finally see it. That is the kind of judgment we remember here at Sovereign Verdict, where petty power eventually meets a consequence it never measured correctly. Subscribe for more original HOA battles, unexpected victories, and homeowners who discover that common sense can be much stronger than a clipboard.